The bullet wasn't meant for him. That was the part that made it unforgivable. Because Dominic Cross had intercepted the order himself, held the folded paper in his bare hands, read his own name written in his brother's handwriting, and he hadn't flinched. Hadn't made a sound. He'd simply folded the paper back, set it on the desk, and poured himself a glass of wine he didn't drink. That was 3 days ago. He'd been waiting ever since. Introduction: The Legend Before the Fall. Let me tell you something about Dominic Cross that you won't find in any police file, any court record, any whispered conversation in the back rooms of Carino's finest restaurants. He had never, not once, in 31 years of running the most feared criminal empire on the eastern seaboard, raised his voice. Not once. Not when rivals burned his warehouse to the ground in 2009. Not when a federal prosecutor put his name on the front page of every newspaper in the state. Not when his closest ally at the time, a man named Gennaro, who had eaten at his table every Sunday for 11 years, tried to sell him to the DEA for witness protection and a new identity somewhere warm. Not once. Dominic Cross didn't need volume. He was 53 years old, silver at the temples, steel in the jaw, eyes the color of deep ocean water in January, the kind of cold that didn't announce itself until you were already too far in to swim back. He wore bespoke suits the color of charcoal and storm clouds. He moved through rooms the way weather moves, not rushing, not announcing, simply arriving and changing the atmosphere of everything around him just by being present. His men had a saying: if Dominic Cross is loud, run; if he's quiet, pray. He was always quiet. He had built the Cross Empire from the ruins of a childhood that would have destroyed most men before they turned 20. Started with nothing. Less than nothing, actually, because nothing doesn't carry debt and doesn't carry hunger and doesn't carry the memory of a father who disappeared one Tuesday morning and simply never came back. He had built it all. The mansion, the territory, the offshore accounts, the political relationships, the port access, the judges, the logistics network that moved across 6 states with the precision of a Swiss watch. He had built it with patience and intelligence and a willingness to make decisions that other men couldn't stomach. He had built it for his family. For his mother, God rest her, for himself. And most of all, most painfully, as it would turn out, for his brother. Marcus, the only person on earth Dominic Cross had ever loved without condition. The only person who understood exactly what that love was worth. And who had decided, somewhere in the hollow space between gratitude and resentment, to spend it. The first fracture. Tension begins, slow burning, every detail matters. It started with a chair. Tuesday evening, inner circle meeting. The war room, long mahogany table, 6 high-backed chairs, walls lined with maps and ledgers. A single painting of the Sicilian coastline that Dominic had bought from a dying artist in Palermo 15 years ago because something in it reminded him of peace. He'd been describing it, the peace. He'd been speaking for perhaps 4 minutes about the Ferrara port deal, the offshore restructuring, the timeline for the northern expansion, the very expansion Marcus had proposed 2 years ago and been quietly told to shelve. And he'd looked up mid-sentence. Marcus wasn't looking at him. Marcus was looking at Sal. And Sal was looking back. And between them, in that half-second of shared eye contact, was an entire conversation that Dominic hadn't been invited to. He kept speaking, didn't pause, didn't blink, filed it away behind his eyes like a document in a vault. But when he returned to his study that night, he sat in the dark for 2 hours. Replaying it. When did my brother start having conversations with my enforcer that require silence? The question sat inside him like a stone in still water, not creating waves, just sitting, heavy, wrong. The second crack appeared 4 days later. A shipment pharmaceutical-grade product moving through the secondary warehouse in the Eastern District had been held for 31 hours. The logistics team called it a routing error, apologized profusely, said it wouldn't happen again. Dominic had nodded pleasantly and sent them home early. Then he'd called Aldo. Aldo was the only name you need to know here, and it's barely a name, more of a presence. A ghost in expensive shoes who had existed on the periphery of Dominic's world for 22 years, known to no one, documented nowhere, the kind of man who could be in a room with you and leave no impression of having been there at all. Dominic had found him in Palermo in 2003, sitting alone in a cafe, reading a newspaper with the focused calm of a man who'd seen everything and been surprised by nothing. He'd recruited him on instinct. He'd never regretted it. He sent Aldo to trace the shipment, quietly, with no announcement, with specific instructions to tell no one, and when Dominic said no one, he meant no one. Not Sal, not the logistics team, not Marcus. The report came back in 72 hours. Clean, precise, devastating. The shipment had been held deliberately. Someone with primary access codes had flagged it as a secondary hold, a protocol that existed only for emergencies, that required both a code and a biometric confirmation. There were 3 people with that combination of access. Dominic eliminated himself. He stared at the remaining 2 names for a long time. Then he picked up the phone and began making calls that no one knew about. Blood memory. Before we go further, before we watch this unfold toward its inevitable and terrible conclusion, you need to understand something about Marcus Cross. Because he wasn't born a betrayer. Nobody is. Betrayal is something that grows, slow and patient, like a vine along a wall, decorative at first, almost beautiful, and then one day you realize it's been pulling the mortar from between the stones the entire time, and the wall is about to come down. Marcus was 47, 8 years younger than Dominic. He had Dominic's same jaw, their mother's same dark eyes, but something softer in the architecture of his face, not weakness exactly, but accessibility. The kind of face that made people feel they could approach him, talk to him, trust him. He had been Dominic's shadow since childhood, not resentfully, genuinely, at first. He had been proud of that shadow, proud to walk in it, to be protected by it, to say my brother and watch people's expressions shift from ordinary to something close to awe. He had loved Dominic the way you love the sun, completely, and with the specific vulnerability of knowing that loving the sun means you can never quite look at it directly. The turning point hadn't been dramatic, no single moment. No explosive argument, just the accumulation of small erasures. A plan shelved, a decision overridden, a compliment redirected. Marcus did well tonight. Yes, Dominic trained him. The Eastern deal was Marcus's idea. Dominic would have gotten there. Always Dominic, always the sun. And Marcus, 43 years old at the time, sitting alone in his car after yet another meeting where his name had been footnoted in his own achievement, Marcus had made a decision. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just quietly. The way the most dangerous decisions are always made. I am going to become the sentence, not the footnote. He'd gone to Sal Benedetti first. Sal, who had grievances of his own, a man passed over for promotion 3 times, a man who believed his loyalty had been taken for granted. The conversation had been careful, exploratory, 2 men testing the temperature of betrayal with their toes before committing to the water. Then the Rixes. Marco Rixai, old enemy, older money, and a very long memory for the territorial pressures Dominic had applied over the years. The kind of man who didn't forgive quickly but paid debts with interest. The offer Marcus had made him was extraordinary in its audacity. Everything Dominic built, all of it, yours and mine. Just help me remove him. and Marco Rixai, sitting across from Marcus in a private room in a restaurant that happened to be one of Dominic Cross's properties. The beautiful, terrible irony of that had smiled for the first time in years and said simply, "When?" The room Dominic wasn't supposed to know about. Here's where it turns. Because Marcus had chosen that restaurant specifically. The private back room, accessed through the kitchen, accessible only with a code that Dominic had given to 3 people in 15 years, and which changed every 90 days on a schedule only Dominic controlled. Marcus had gotten the code from Sal, who had gotten it from watching Dominic enter it one Tuesday morning, 3 months earlier, when Sal had been standing at the angle that Dominic, just once, just that one morning, had not accounted for. It was the only surveillance failure Dominic Cross had made in 11 years. It had been deliberate. He had let Sal see the code, had engineered the angle, engineered the moment, engineered the entire small theater of apparent vulnerability, because he had suspected Sal for longer than any of them knew and had needed to give the suspicion a road to walk on. He'd baited his own trap with his own access codes. And when Aldo reported that Marcus and Sal and 2 Rixai lieutenants had met in the back room of his own restaurant, Dominic sat with the information for one full night, alone, in his study, in the dark, and felt something he hadn't felt since his mother died. Not rage. Not surprise. Something that had no clean name in any language. The feeling of watching something beautiful burn, and knowing that the hand holding the match belongs to someone you taught to walk. The dinner. 8 days before the end. Dominic called a dinner. Just the 2 of them. He cooked pasta al ragu from their mother's recipe, a recipe that lived in no book, that existed only in muscle memory, 4 hours of simmering, the kind of smell that transformed a house into a home before you'd even open the door. Marcus's favorite since age 7. Dominic had started cooking at noon. Marcus arrived at 7, stood in the kitchen doorway and watched his brother move around the stove with the focused ease of a man completely at home, rolling his sleeves to the forearm, adjusting the heat with 2 fingers, not looking up as he said simply, "Sit down." Marcus sat. They ate the way they had as boys, slowly, without performance, the conversation moving through the rooms of their shared history like light through familiar windows. Their mother, the old neighborhood, a story about Dominic's first car, a rusted Alfa Romeo that broke down on the way to its own test drive. Marcus laughed, the real laugh, not the boardroom laugh or the diplomatic laugh, but the one from childhood, unguarded and undefended. Dominic watched him laugh and felt the grief deepen. "Do you remember what you told me?" Marcus said. "The night before you made your first real move. I was maybe 19. You sat me down and you said, 'If you're afraid, you're still in the game,'" Dominic finished quietly. "The day you stop being afraid is the day you've either won or you've already lost, and you won't know which until it's over." Silence. Marcus turned his wine glass slowly on the table, around and around. "I've thought about that a lot," he said, "lately." "I know," Dominic said. The 2 words hung in the air between them like smoke. Marcus looked up. Something in Dominic's eyes, just for a moment, just a fraction of a second, was not the cold winter water, was something older and rawer than that. Marcus looked away first. They finished the meal in silence that was somehow both comfortable and unbearable. The silence of men who are saying everything by saying nothing. When Marcus left, coat on, keys in hand, standing at the door, he turned back once. "Dom," his voice was strange, stripped of something. Dominic looked at him. "I want you to know," Marcus started, then stopped. Then the food was perfect. It tasted exactly like hers. Dominic nodded once. Watched his brother walk to his car in the dark, his footsteps loud on the gravel drive, the sound fading until there was nothing left of him but taillights disappearing into the night. He stood in the doorway for a long time. Then he went inside, closed the door, locked it, stood with his back against it in the dark entryway, and allowed himself exactly 45 seconds of something that was not strength. Then he straightened, rolled his sleeves back down, buttoned his cuffs, and went back to work. The letter and the driver. 5 days before the end, 2 in the morning. A knock at the side entrance of the mansion. Not a security knock, not the firm, announced knock of a man with authority. A small knock, hesitant. The knock of someone who knew that what they were doing would cost them everything if they'd read the room wrong. Dominic opened it himself. Marcus's driver, a young man named Tio, 26 years old, 5 years in Marcus's employ, with a sister in nursing school that Marcus paid the tuition for every semester. Tio stood in the rain, soaking wet, holding an envelope in both hands like an offering. His hands were shaking. Dominic looked at him for a long moment, then stepped back and opened the door wider. Inside, under the kitchen light, Tio set the envelope on the table and couldn't quite look up. "I've driven him to every meeting," Tio said. "I've heard everything. I kept telling myself it wasn't my business. He stopped, cleared his throat. 3 nights ago he made a call while I was driving. He forgot the partition wasn't up." Dominic said nothing, looked at the envelope. "The call was to someone I've heard him call before, a woman. I thought she was." Tio shook his head. "She wasn't. She's not. She's a forensic accountant who specializes in untraceable asset transfers. He's already moved 40% of the offshore reserves into a structure she built for him." Dominic's expression didn't change, but his right hand, resting on the kitchen table, became very still. "The night is set for 3 days from now," Tio continued. "He's bringing 4 men from the Rixai family. Sal will disable the internal security from the monitoring station at 11. They'll enter through the East Garden Gate at midnight." A pause. "He told them you'd be alone, that you always work late in the study on Wednesday nights." He had always worked late on Wednesday nights. Marcus had known that for 30 years. Dominic reached over and picked up the envelope, opened it without hurry. Inside was a single photograph, a screen capture from what appeared to be a phone call, time-stamped, showing a wire transfer confirmation. $41 million, moved so cleanly it would have disappeared without a trace within the week. His own money, his own empire, already being carved out from under him, piece by piece, like organs removed from a living body. He set the photograph down, looked at Tio. "Why?" he said simply. "You've worked for my brother for 5 years, you're loyal to him. Why are you here?" Tio finally looked up. His eyes were red. "Because he told me once," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "that the reason he did any of this, all of it, was for family, that the empire meant nothing without the people in it." He swallowed. "I don't know what happened to him, but whatever he is now, he's not that man anymore." A breath. "And I didn't want to be the person who let it happen without saying something." A long silence. Dominic looked at this young man, soaking wet, terrified, risking everything on the chance that the most powerful man in the city was also, somewhere beneath all that power, a fair one. "Go home," Dominic said. "Take your sister somewhere for the weekend, be unreachable." "And after?" Dominic considered. "After," he said quietly, "come back, there'll be work. Wednesday at midnight." Dominic sent the security home at 9. He sat in his study at his desk under the single lamp and worked. Real work, reviewed contracts, signed documents, made 2 phone calls. Not performance, not theater. Just a man at work, same as every Wednesday, because if this was going to be his last Wednesday, then it would be conducted with the same dignity as every Wednesday before it. At 11, he heard the monitoring station go dark. The soft electronic click of the security system disarming, the tiny red light on the panel by the door going black. Sal. On schedule. At 11:58, he heard the east garden gate open. At midnight exactly, footsteps on the marble corridor. Multiple, trying for quiet and only partially succeeding, because marble was marble and stone told the truth whether you wanted it to or not. At 12:03, his study door opened. Marcus entered first. He was dressed in black, all black, with the careful deliberateness of a man who had thought about this moment for a long time and decided that it deserved a kind of ceremony. Behind him, Sal, hollow-eyed and sweating, one hand inside his jacket, and four men, the Rixai men, arranged in the corridor beyond the doorway like furniture. Dominic didn't look up from the document he was reading. He finished the paragraph, set his pen down with precision, folded his hands on the desk. Then looked up. The lamplight made the room amber and severe, shadows pooling in the corners, everything beyond the desk's radius existing in a kind of controlled darkness. And Dominic Cross, sitting in that light, looked not frightened, not even tense, but profoundly, devastatingly calm. The calm of a man who has made his peace, who knows exactly where he stands and has decided the view from here is acceptable. Marcus stepped closer, stopped, studied his brother's face. "You knew," Marcus said. "6 weeks ago," Dominic said. "The shipment was the first mistake. The restaurant was confirmation. Tio was the map." Something moved behind Marcus's eyes. Shock quickly controlled. "Tio is safe." Dominic's voice was level. "Don't." A beat. Then Marcus let out a long, slow breath. The breath of a man who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just set it down, even if setting it down means the thing he was carrying crushes him on its way to the floor. "Then why are you still here?" Marcus asked. "Because this is my house," Dominic said, "and you're my brother. And if you're going to do this, Marcus, then you're going to look at me while you do it. You're going to do it with my eyes on you. You're not going to do it from a distance like a business transaction, like a contract, like I'm a problem to be managed." His voice was quiet, absolutely quiet, like the bottom of the ocean. "You're going to look at the face of the man who carried you on his back across 2 neighborhoods when you broke your ankle at 13, because we couldn't afford the cab. You're going to look at the man who put his body between you and Gennaro Falco when you were 19 and Falco wanted your ear as a message. You're going to look at me, and you're going to own this." The silence that followed was seismic. Sal had stopped breathing. The Rixai men in the corridor were as still as the walls. Marcus was shaking, barely visible, just a tremor in the hands, the betrayal of a body that knew what the mind was forcing it to do and wanted no part of it. "You suffocated me," Marcus said. His voice cracked on the last word and he hated it, hated himself for it, pressed his lips together and recovered. "For 30 years, everything I built, your empire, everything I achieved, your legacy. I could have been something, Dom, on my own with my own name. Do you understand that? I could have." "I know," Dominic said. Marcus stopped. "I know," Dominic said again, quieter, something different in it now, something that was not justification or argument but simply truth. "I got it wrong. I thought providing was the same as seeing. I thought building something and giving you a place in it was the same as giving you a place of your own. I was wrong." A pause. "I've known I was wrong for 3 years. I was trying to find the right way to fix it." He reached into the desk drawer. The room tensed. Sal's hand tightened inside his jacket. But what Dominic withdrew was not a weapon. It was a folder. He set it on the desk between them. "Open it," he said. Marcus stared at it, made no move. "Open it, Marcus." Slowly, with the caution of a man expecting another betrayal in the only direction he hadn't covered, Marcus leaned forward and opened the folder. He stared at what was inside for a very long time. His face made a journey, confusion, recognition, disbelief, and then something that had no clean name, something that lived in the geography between grief and devastation. Inside the folder, the Southern Territory Plan, 3 years old, in Dominic's hand, notarized and signed and sealed with the full legal weight of a man who had always known how to make things permanent. The entire Southern operation, 40% of the Empire's territory, in Marcus's name, only Marcus's name, structured so that Dominic had no legal claim to it whatsoever. His own independent kingdom, 3 years old, already prepared. Already waiting. Marcus looked up slowly. 3 years, he said. The words came out barely above a whisper. Your 50th birthday, Dominic said. I was going to give it to you then. The quiet that fell between them now was different from all the previous quiets. This one had no tension in it. It had something worse. It had finality. Marcus looked down at the document, back up at his brother. Why are you showing me this now? He whispered. Tonight, like this, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you? Because, Dominic said, and for the first time, just for one sentence, the control in his voice shifted, bent, slightly. The way iron bends just before it breaks. I wanted to know if you'd come for me before I told you. The room was absolutely silent. I needed to know, Dominic said, what I was dealing with, whether it was ambition which I could have understood, which I could have forgiven, or whether it was something deeper. Whether you actually, he stopped, composed himself with visible effort. First time Marcus had ever seen that, first time in 53 years. I needed to know if you wanted me gone, Marcus, not just free, gone. Tears were running down Marcus's face now. He wasn't trying to stop them. His body had simply decided that this was beyond the reach of composure and was conducting itself accordingly. I didn't want you gone, Marcus said. I know that now, Dominic said. Then why? 'Cause knowing it now doesn't reach back and change the last 6 weeks. Dominic stood, slowly. He was very still on his feet, very upright, everything in his posture composed and deliberate. Sal Benedetti will be retired, quietly with enough money to disappear well. The Rixai arrangement is already dissolved. Marco and I spoke yesterday morning. He was very understanding once I explained that the offer Marcus had made was made on foundations that weren't as solid as advertised. A pause. The 4 men in my corridor will leave the same way they entered and speak to no one about being here, because I have already had conversations with their families that have made the wisdom of discretion very clear. He buttoned his jacket, one button precise. The folder is yours. The territory is yours. My lawyers will complete the transfer by Friday. He began walking toward the door. Dom, Marcus's voice was raw, wrecked. Dominic stopped, didn't turn. I'm sorry, Marcus said. A pause that lasted the length of a lifetime. I know you are, Dominic said. He walked through the door. Past the Rixai men, who parted before him without being asked, their eyes down, not out of threat, but out of the instinctive deference that some presences command without trying. Past Sal, who couldn't look at him, who pressed himself against the wall as Dominic passed, a man trying to take up as little space as possible in the presence of the thing he'd helped to destroy. Down the marble corridor. Footsteps echoing, slow, even unhurried. The sound of a man who had survived. Not intact, no, not without damage, not without something having been irreparably altered in the architecture of who he was. But still walking, still upright, still Dominic Cross. What victory costs? Marcus stood in the empty study for a long time after everyone had gone. The Rixai men left, Sal left, the house became very quiet. He stood at Dominic's desk, ran his hand along the surface, the scratches in the leather from 30 years of fountain pens, the small burn mark near the left edge from a candle Dominic had always insisted on keeping lit when he worked late, the shallow groove worn into the right corner where his brother's arm had rested thousands of evenings, while he built an empire one careful decision at a time. He sat in the chair, picked up the folder, let it fall back to the desk. 40% of the Cross Empire, all of it his, everything he'd wanted. He had a number, he could call it tonight, the forensic accountant, transfer the offshore reserves back to where they belonged before anyone noticed, walk away from the Rixai wreckage, take his territory, his independence, his name, his clean break. He'd won. Technically, architecturally, completely. He'd gotten everything he came for. His phone lit up on the desk. A message from Dominic, no text, just a photograph. Marcus looked at it for a long time. It was an old photograph, scanned and sent digitally, but originally printed on the thick, glossy paper of the mid-90s. Two boys on a stoop in South Carino. Dominic, maybe 20, thin and sharp-eyed with something hungry and determined burning in his expression. Marcus, 12, sitting pressed against his brother's side with the unself-conscious trust of a child who has decided this is the safest place in the world. Dominic's arm was around Marcus's shoulder. They were both grinning. Marcus stared at the photograph until it blurred. He had the territory. He had the money. He had independence, autonomy, a name that would finally stand on its own. He had burned the only thing in his life that had always, even when he didn't deserve it, even when he was standing in his brother's study at midnight with 4 borrowed killers in the corridor, been unconditional. The study was warm from the lamp. The pasta sauce, left on the kitchen stove, had burned down to nothing an hour ago. The house smelled like something that was already over. Marcus Cross sat in his brother's chair in his brother's house and held his brother's photograph. He had everything he'd ever wanted. And he understood, with the cold and absolute clarity that only comes when it's too late, that having everything you want and losing everything you love are not opposites. They are sometimes devastatingly, permanently the exact same thing. In another part of the city, Dominic Cross sat in a car outside a building he owned but rarely visited. Alone, engine off, lights off, just sitting in the dark. He didn't make any calls. He didn't go inside. He just sat there, very still, very quiet. The way he always was. The way he had trained himself to be. For so long that he was no longer entirely certain, on nights like this one, where the training ended and the man began. He sat there until almost 4 in the morning. Then he straightened, started the engine, drove home. As the sun came up over Carino, gold and indifferent, washing everything equally. The ruins and the monuments alike, Dominic Cross walked back through the front door of his mansion. Past the faint smell of the burned sauce. Past the study where the lamp had finally burned out. Past all of it. Up the stairs. To bed. Alone as he had always been. As he had always known, somewhere beneath the empire and the power and the iron control, that he would always be. The most powerful man in the city. Who could not protect the thing he loved most. From the person he loved most. From themselves.